Hi, my name's Paul Grogan, and in this gaming rules video, I'm going to be giving you a rules overview of Knights of Fire Battle for Budapest, which is a game designed by David Turczi and Brian Train and published by Mighty Boards, who commissioned this video to be created. Knights of Fire is the sequel to the 2016 game Days of Ire and sees the events of the second week of the Hungarian Revolution of 1956. Following on from the events in Days of Ire, the game begins just as the Red Army arrives at the edge of the capital and pushes into the heart of the city, bent on retribution, destruction, and the ruthless pursuit of control. For the players in charge of the Hungarian defence, there is no time left for organising and sedition. This is a hopeless war of survival, plain and simple. The game has two main modes of play. One or two players can play a cooperative game against an automated Soviet commander, or another player can take on the role of the Soviets and try to win the game for themselves. And each mode of play comes with a basic version and an advanced version, which you can use once you've played a couple of games. In this video, I'm going to be explaining the rules where there is a player taking on the role of the Soviets, and then later on I'll cover some of the differences for the cooperative game. The game is played over a maximum of 10 rounds, with each round representing 8 hours of time, and every third round being a night round, which changes some of the rules. And each round is divided into 6 phases, which are carried out in order. In the draw phase, the revolutionary players will draw more cards from their deck into their hands. There is a hand limit, and if you exceed that, you choose which cards to keep and discard the rest. In the tactics phase, the Soviet player takes their 12 tactics cards, chooses 6 to keep in their hand and shuffles the rest face down as a combat deck. Phase 3 is the reinforcement phase, which is skipped in the first round of the game, but in later rounds the revolutionary players may play 1 card from their hand to bring into play some reinforcement onto the board. The operations phase is where the main game takes place, and players will take it in turns to perform actions on the board. I'll explain this in a lot more detail later on. Once all players have passed, play proceeds to Phase 5, which is the adjustments phase. Various tracks are updated: Soviet prestige, Hungarian morale, and Soviet readiness. Finally, in the cleanup phase, Soviet units become active again, insurgents can be hidden, the killed and arrested units are removed, and the round marker is advanced. The game ends if the Soviet prestige reaches 0, or the Hungarians surrender, or at the end of round 10. At this point, the outcome of the game is determined, which I'll explain later on. In the operations phase, one of the revolutionary players takes the first turn, followed by the Soviet player, then the other revolutionary player, then the Soviet player, and so on. And play continues like this until all players have passed. The revolutionaries are fighting a losing battle and must do everything they can to try and reduce the Soviet prestige. This includes helping as many civilians to escape as possible, delaying the onslaught of the Soviet regiments, and disabling the Soviet units as often as possible. On your turn as a revolutionary player, you can play up to 3 cards from your hand to perform actions. Each action costs a certain number of operation points, which you get from playing cards. The icons on the cards are also important, and sometimes to perform a certain action, you need to play cards with a certain icon. For example, in order to perform the ambush action, which requires cards totaling 3 ops, at least one of those cards you play must show the ambush icon. You can always do the movement action, no special icons are required, and for each op spent during movement, you can move one group of fighters from one district to an adjacent one. For example, I could spend 1 ops to move this fighter to here, and then another to move it and this one to here. Note that the locals, which are the ones with 2 icons on them, cannot be moved. Another action that you can do without requiring special icons is to help civilians flee across the Austrian border, and this is one of the main objectives for the Hungarian players. The cost of this action is 6 operation points, but the cost is reduced by 1 for each insurgent in that district. So here it would cost 3 ops, and the civilian is placed on the appropriate space of the game board. Each civilian has a value which is kept secret from the Soviet player for the whole game. You want to be trying to save the civilians with the higher values, because this will be important when determining the outcome of the game. Other actions you can do include ambush, which, as mentioned earlier, requires you to have played a card with the ambush icon on it. And you must also have a hidden insurgent that has the ambush icon on it in the district where you want to perform the ambush action. A hidden insurgent is one where the block is facing the revolutionary players, rather than lying face up on the board like these two. When you ambush, you reveal the insurgent with the ambush icon, and then flip a Soviet garrison or regiment face down. It's now disabled, and this will be useful later on in the round. The other way to attack the Soviet garrisons and regiments is with the open attack action. This is resolved in a similar way to the ambush action, except you don't need to play cards with any special icons, and you can use any armed insurgents, they don't have to be hidden. The downside is that once you've disabled the Soviet unit, there is a counterattack, and your insurgent may even get wounded or killed. Another action is to build a barricade. This can only be done by a hidden insurgent with the barricade icon, and at least one card played for the action must have the barricade icon on it. Barricades limit Soviet movement and prevent some attacks. When you are playing with two revolutionary players, you can play one of your cards face down. In this case, it doesn't give you any operation points, but you pass it to your teammate, and this can be incredibly useful sometimes. In the advanced version of the game, two other actions are available to you. The medic action, which allows you to heal or hide insurgents, and the defy action, which reduces Soviet readiness and may also cause them to lose prestige. Once one of the revolutionary players has taken their turn, play passes to the Soviet player, who then takes their turn. The Soviet side must concentrate on reducing the morale of the insurgency by arresting the civilians before they can escape, eliminating the Hungarian insurgents, and placing defensive garrisons throughout key locations of the city. As the Soviet player, you must play one or two tactics cards per turn. The cards you play determine the actions you can perform, but all actions must be performed in the same divisional sector. The move action moves an active regiment to an adjacent district as long as it doesn't cross into another divisional sector. This action can also be used to bring in regiments from the staging area into the adjacent district. Another action that you can do is to probe, which is the Soviets' basic attack action, and you cannot carry out this action in a district that has a barricade. To do a probe, choose an active regiment and then flip over the top card of the combat deck. The probe values printed on the card indicate the number of wounds that you can inflict on insurgents in the district. This number if it's daytime, and this number for nighttime. 2 wounds kills an insurgent. After a probe action, if the district contained an insurgent with the counterattack icon, even if that insurgent was wounded or even killed during the action, then there is the chance for a Hungarian counterattack. To counterattack, one of the revolutionary players must discard one or more cards totaling 3 ops, and at least one of those cards needs to have the counterattack icon on it. This flips over the Soviet regiment to the disabled side. The assault action is another option for the Soviet player, but this cannot be done at night. For each assault action, the Soviet player chooses an active regiment and flips over the top card of the combat deck, in the same way as the probe action, except this time looking at the assault value and dealing this many wounds to insurgents in the district. The recon action allows the Soviet player to reveal hidden insurgents in that district, but this can only be done during the day. And the arrest action allows the Soviet player to move one civilian to the arrested area of the board as long as there is no revealed insurgent in the district. The clear action allows the removal of a barricade, and the garrison action means that a district with an objective icon and at least one regiment can have a garrison established there. And finally, the rally action allows a disabled regiment or garrison to be flipped back to the active side. As mentioned earlier, turns alternate between the revolutionary players and the Soviet player, and between the revolutionary players, play alternates between them. Once all players have passed, play proceeds to the next phase. In this phase, a few things happen. The Soviet prestige and readiness drops by 1. If the Soviet prestige drops to 0, or this was the 10th round of play, then the game ends and the revolutionaries win a great victory. Otherwise, the Hungarians may choose to surrender if they have 6 or fewer armed insurgents on the board, and they must surrender if there are no insurgents left. Note that the Hungarians surrendering ends the game, but doesn't necessarily mean that they will lose. If the Hungarians don't surrender, play continues. Morale is then adjusted based on the number of active or disabled garrisons, and the number of insurgents killed or civilians arrested that round. If morale drops to or below 0, then this causes the Hungarians to surrender, although as mentioned earlier, this doesn't necessarily mean that they will lose the game. And finally, the game has a cleanup phase, where disabled Soviet units are flipped back to their active side, and the revolutionaries may hide any number of insurgents. All units in the killed/arrested area are returned to the box, unless there is an odd number of them, in which case one remains. And finally, the round marker is advanced to the next round. The game can end with one of 4 possible outcomes. If either time runs out after 10 rounds, or Soviet prestige reaches 0 before the Hungarians surrender, then this is a grand revolutionary victory. Although the Red Army eventually takes the city, the Soviet commander is recalled in shame to Moscow. If there isn't a grand revolutionary victory, then the game will end when the Hungarians surrender, which can happen in a number of different ways. In this case, the Soviet prestige is reduced based on the values of the civilians that made it across the border into Austria, and half the number of surviving insurgents. If prestige now reaches 0, the revolution has been stopped, but too late. This counts as a normal revolutionary victory. If Soviet prestige is between 1 and 3, it's a normal Soviet victory. And if the Soviet prestige is 4 or higher, it's a grand Soviet victory. Knights of Fire can also be played as a solo or 2-player cooperative game where you take on the role of the Hungarian revolutionaries and the Soviet side is automated. After the draw phase at the start of each round, 5 cards will be dealt out from the Konev AI deck, some of them face down. The targeting tokens are placed above the cards. In the operations phase, whenever it's the Soviets' turn, the die is rolled indicating which of the Konev cards is activated. If the card is face down, flip it face up, and then follow all the text on the card before discarding it. Some cards refer to the highest threat district, and this is determined by the value of the civilians in that district, and then the number of insurgents, and so on. Any time a Konev card causes wounds, the first one must be applied to an already wounded insurgent, killing them. Then, damage is dealt to revealed insurgents using a priority system based on the icons on the insurgents. For example, insurgents with an ambush icon will be targeted before ones with a medic icon. And any time a Konev card deals at least 1 damage, then there is an opportunity for a Hungarian counterattack using the same rules as for the competitive game. Knights of Fire can be played in a variety of different ways, either cooperatively or competitively, and each mode of play has a basic version and an advanced version. On top of that, the game can be customised further by adjusting some of the difficulty settings, making a cooperative game easier or harder to play, and adjusting the game balance between a Soviet player and Hungarian players if one player is a lot better than the others. I hope you found this video useful in learning how to play Knights of Fire. For more of my videos, please subscribe to the channel. And until next time, take care and thanks for watching.